Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Merhaba ve hoş geldin. This is about all the Turkish that I have for you today. What I do have for you is one of the largest benchmarks that has ever been conducted in the field of conversion rate optimization. Now, for those of you who don't know us, we at Optimizely are the world's biggest digital laboratory. Roughly 40% of all the experiments that were run in the world last year were run using our platform. And these were done by some of the biggest companies around the world. Famous brands whose entire value chain for innovation, disruption, and experimentation is conducted using our technology. What I want to go into for a moment is to share with you some of the research that we've conducted over the past several years. Because to Optimizely, optimization is our lifeblood. Without it, our company could not exist. And so we've spent many years running substantial site-wide personalization campaigns, experiments, and building custom prototypes. Additionally, we've conducted global benchmarks, industry surveys, and analyzed some of the highest revenue-generating experiments of all time. These are tests that generated over $1 million while the test was active. We have been driving adoption at over 1,000 companies, delivering services using our partners as well as our global services team. And lastly, conducting interviews and over 500 business reviews with some of the biggest customers we have around the world. So what I want to show with you is our benchmark, which looked at over 100,000 experiments. These include 250,000 variations and were run by 1,000 different companies. Now, every experiment we show to you has at least 1,000 visitors per variation and at least some variation code to not be an AA test. These come from all verticals, though primarily retail, media, and high tech. They span most regions, though primarily North America and EMEA. And lastly, they cover all site sizes. And what comes out of our research is that there are 4 traits that are essential to high-quality experimentation. These are the factors that differentiate the highest-performing companies around the world from those who are merely testing for the sake of testing. And the first and most important feature of a quality testing program is that you drive deep insights. You have a strong data culture. The second is you develop multiple solutions. You don't just pick one path and build a long-term roadmap. Instead, you see a lot of different avenues that you can go down and let the data drive you. The third is that you ensure technical resources. Without a developer, without being able to make truly complex changes, it's hard to drive meaningful impact. And lastly, it means that you analyze thoroughly. You understand how long an experiment should run and how to track for success. So I'll go into each of these for just a moment. But the first I want to start with is how to drive deep insights. One of the first things we looked at to understand which companies were performing the best was to look at, did they have analytics instrumented on their website? So we took all 1,000 companies in our benchmark and we looked at the ones that had no analytics and compared them to those who had analytics. And we found that companies who have analytics on their website are 30% more likely to have a winning experiment. Companies that also had heat mapping solutions are an additional 12% more likely to have a winning experiment. In fact, compared to no analytics instrumented on your website, you're 1.5 times as likely when you have heat maps and analytics in place. Now, just a question here. I assume all of you have analytics in this room. Is that correct? Do you have analytics? Raise your hand. How many of you also have heat maps? I still see a decent, healthy amount, but it's something you should consider investing into. If experimentation and UX improvements are key to you, it's important to invest into the research that enables that. Now, one of the things that I always recommend when you conduct research is to take your most important KPIs, in this case revenue, and split them down into smaller components. So if revenue is mathematically revenue per visitor times visitors. So if you make $10 million a month and you have 4 million visitors on your website, you make $250 a visitor. Revenue per visitor is mathematically average order value times conversion rate. So if 2.5% of the people buy an average of $100, you make $250 a visitor. The reason I always show this is that in the field of optimization, I always hear people talk about improving their conversion rates. And they forget that average order value is half of the pie. They don't actively look at the other aspects of their website and their business that drive revenue for their customers, that drive revenue for their business. And so it's really critical to understand how to break down each of these metrics to figure out where you're optimizing and why. Now, if you say that conversion rate is what you're trying to improve for your business, you might want to look at the 2 halves of the funnel, add to cart and cart checkout. Each of these can be zoomed into by looking at, for example, the conversion funnel. So in this case, if we look at an airline, the stages from the home page to booking a flight is your add to cart, and your stages from the passenger details to the payment page is your cart checkout. And for each of these phases, you want to look at the users in 3 different ways. How likely are they to complete this action and proceed to the next stage of the funnel? How likely are they to diverge and to go onto a different area of your website, but not down the funnels you intend? And how likely are they to exit? What is the moment in the user experience where they're clearly indicating to you that they're unhappy and they're unwilling to give your service an additional chance? And based off this, you might say, well, flight results is where I have to focus because it has the highest exit rate. The most percentage of users who say, on this particular area of the business, I'm unwilling to conduct further business with you. And so you can zoom into that and ask yourself, okay, if we look at the website right now, what pain points do users experience? And where is it that they should be focusing? So once you've outlined the most important calls to actions, a good step to ask yourself is that where people are actually looking? So what we'll often do is we'll look at heat maps. We'll take a website and we'll actually analyze where are people looking, where are they distracted, and how does this align with the actions that we find most important? We'll also ask ourselves, is the page clear? Is there a high cognitive load? Are people overwhelmed by the amount of information and options? And if the website has survey instrumented on their business, we'll actually look at what do the surveys indicate. What type of complaints do we get from the users? We'll even segment the results by device type to figure out, are mobile users behaving differently than desktop? Are people behaving differently whether in a city or in a rural area? And lastly, we'll even ask our customers themselves, what is it that you were looking to achieve on this website? What was making your experience poor? And lastly, what do we get out of UX research? One particular path for which is customer service discussions, because the customer service teams usually have the best insight into what's bothering customers, and pain points are gold in the field of optimization. If something is bothering your users, solving that is one of the best avenues for improving your conversion rates. Now, once you have the pain points, it's important that you develop multiple solutions. And so, a big problem that we have is that we refer to the field of conversion rate optimization as A/B testing, which implies A versus B, or just 2 variations. What we did at Optimizely is we sorted every experiment run around the world by the number of variations. So we went from 2 variations to 6 or more, to look at how often do people run experiments by numbers of variations. And so what we find is that 3/4 of all the experiments that have been run around the world had only 2 variations. In fact, only a small percentage of users were running more than 2 variations. And so when you zoom into this data, you can split this out into a few different categories. How likely were users to have a significant uplift, a significant reduction, and lastly, an inconclusive results. Now for each of these, you can actually see that the more variations you add to your experiments, the more likely you are to win. In fact, an experiment with 5 variations is substantially more likely to have a winning uplift than an experiment with only 2. Now why is that? Why are tests with more variations more likely to win? There's a couple of reasons. The first of which is that you simply have more options for successful results. You've tried more different solutions, you're more likely to find something that works. But a second that's really critical is that companies who only test 2 variations are often part of a reactive culture. Their product team has a 6-month roadmap. Everything is already planned out, and the only job the experiment has is to check some code off before it's shipped. But a high-performing company doesn't set out a long-term roadmap. Instead, they set out problems that need to be solved. And so we'll see for this particular pain point, we might have 6 different routes that we can go down to solve it, and then based off the data, we can pick the best path and the highest uplifts. Now, one thing we did was to ask ourselves, is this a statistically significant uplift? In our meta-analysis of 100,000 experiments, can we actually say that this is improving the performance of companies? What we found is that with 99% certainty, running more variations does improve the quality of your testing program. So it's not enough to just create experiments with a high number of variations. Any good experiment begins with a problem that you're trying to solve, and not a solution that you're looking to release. And so what we always recommend to companies is that you take the problem and you split it off into distinct chunks. You identify all of the pain points that your users have, and you validate them through research and interviews. You prioritize the ones that are the most important and urgent to solve. The next step then is to push your creative boundaries. Don't just think of the first solution that you might be able to run. Can you actually identify 10 distinct solutions to a problem? This is a step that I always take to make sure that I'm actively trying every possible route. And only then do I problem solve what are the 3 or 4 best solutions to run. And then lastly, I identify the metrics by which I want to analyze this experiment. Now, the next factor that's really critical to high-performance testing is that you have technical resources. Just a quick check. How many of you have full-time developers working on your UX or optimization? It's a very low number of hands that are being raised right now. How many of you have a part-time developer? Let's say like 5 to 10 hours a week. How many of you have no development resources at all available to you? Are people just not raising their hands, or is the majority of the crowd here? I'm seeing a few people daring to raise their hands. Well, what we did was, we looked at 250,000 variations that have been run, and we analyzed them by the number of lines of code per variation. So, for this particular variation, we counted all the semicolons, which are logical breakpoints in the lines of code. And when we sum all of these up, we see that this particular variation is about 24 lines of code, which is about halfway in the spectrum. But when you look at all the variations that have been run around the world by the number of lines of code, you see that 51% of all variations had 5 lines of code or less. In fact, 90% of all variations run around the world had fewer than 50 lines of code. Only 8% had more than 50. But when you look at the likelihood of this individual variation winning, based off the amount of code in that variation, the more complex the variation, the more likely it is to win. In fact, more than twice as likely, 2.1 to 2.2 times as often. Now, this is an important thing to focus on, because one of the things we often hear in the field of optimization is that it's very easy, anyone can do it. And it's true. You can change the color of a button, you can change the text on a display, you can rearrange distinct elements, you can add new code. All these small changes can add up to an improvement for your business. But have truly high impact testing, you need to make large, substantial changes. You cannot simply hope that you're making a small scale change which has some psychological effect out of nowhere. You need to make a drastic improvement in the user experience and it needs to affect all of your users. So one of the things that I always recommend to think about is if you're starting out with testing, do not focus on the low-hanging fruit. It's very easy to run the experiments that are very simple and to continue to focus there, to continue to pick the low-hanging fruits. But over time, that well will dry and you will not have any more experiments to run. Instead, the goal should be to scale out your program. Use the experiments and the wins that you have today to get more resources to run higher quality experiments over time. This is the only way to build out a scalable organization. Now, the last insight that's really critical is that you analyze experiments thoroughly. And this comes on a number of different factors. The first of which is you have to set the right number of goals. So if you look at every experiment that's been run around the world, and you sort them by the amount of goals that have been attached to that experiment, you see that 60% of all tests have 3 goals or less. And so what are these most common goals? They're usually conversion rate, revenue per visitor, click-through rate on a button. Most companies, when they run a test, all they say to themselves is, did this test win? Did I get more money down the line? Am I happy with that uplift in revenue? But this is a problematic mentality for a couple of reasons. The first of which is that you don't truly understand where you need to improve. You're not granular about where you're making your changes. And the second is that you don't get feedback on whether you've made an improvement in the right direction. Think for a moment you want to become a better tennis player. If you want to improve at tennis, you can't just focus on winning more matches. You have to improve your serve, your swings, your returns. You have to think about how you cover the court, and you understand that optimizing each of these individual traits makes you a better tennis player and makes you more likely to win. But in the field of optimization, 2/3 of all experiments are only tracking, did we win? And they're not asking themselves, did we improve the underlying behaviors that make us higher performers? So, it should come as no surprise that the more goals you've attached to an experiment, the more likely you are to find an uplift. In fact, up to 3 times as likely when you go from 1 goal to 7 or 8 or more. Now, an experiment isn't higher quality just because you added more goals to it. It is still the same change that you made. But if you think between a test that has a 20% likelihood of finding an uplift over here versus 40% over here, more than twice as high, the insight I want you to take away from this is you're likely leaving money on the table by tracking too few goals. Because you're not tracking the underlying elements that show that you're heading in the right direction, you're not getting feedback often enough to know which changes truly made a positive difference. So if you think about conversion rate's mathematically add to cart times cart checkout. But each of these goals can be further subdivided to show to you exactly how granular you can get. So add to cart is a function of the product view rate. What percentage of users viewed a product in a session? It's the number of products that they viewed per session, how relevant each of these were, and any form of size, type, or color interactions. Even these can be zoomed into further, so your product relevance is a function of how you got there. Did you land directly on the product page, arrive there by a site search, subcategories, or filter refinements? And your cart checkout is a function of distinct stages. Did you sign up or log into your accounts? Did you enter your shipping details? Did you enter payments? And each of these can be further subdivided into the form fields. So your shipping detail can be looked at every single form field to see what percentage of users attempted that, how much time did it take them to fill in the form field, and were they ultimately successful? When you only track conversion rate, it's tough to be granular about where to improve because you're just focused on the high-level metric. Did I sell more products, yes or no? But if you split your business's KPIs up to this level, you can see the problem with our page right now, the problem with our conversion rate is that on the shipping details, the time per field is really high on the phone number section or some other fields. And that helps you understand why people aren't converting and how you can improve that individual elements. When you only track high-level goals, you don't know where to focus, and it's easy to get lost in the overall efforts. Equally important is that you run an experiment for a long enough time. Now, what you see here is that when every variation is sorted by the number of visitors in that variation, the more visitors you have, the higher the likelihood of winning. Traffic is a competitive advantage in the field of optimization. Now, most of us can't control our traffic. We have a website that is of a certain size and is not likely to change very soon. However, we can control the time for which we test. What I see far too often when I talk to my customers is that when they run an experiment, they have 2 weeks to give an answer back to their boss. They have 2 weeks to say whether a change won or lost. Now, imagine for a moment that in the field of medicine, doctors only had 2 months to prove that medicine worked. 1/10 of us might have polio right now. But in the field of medicine, people have accepted that high-quality insights and breakthroughs depend on giving things the appropriate amount of time, getting the right amount of data. In the field of online behavioral psychology, in the field of experimental design, we need to push back against management who tells us, you need to get an answer to us by the end of this month, and tell them to run a high-quality, sustainable program, we'll need the time and the data to make high-quality decisions. So when you are forced into an arbitrary timeline, push back and let people understand that you need the freedom to be truly successful, and you should not let arbitrary timelines dictate your performance. Now, if you look at the best practice of world-class optimization, there's about 5 of them. And somebody remember what these were? Just shout it out. You guys are a very polite, quiet audience today. It's okay. So I'll go through them. They are having heat maps and analytics, testing 4 or more variations, having more than 50 lines of code in a test, having at least 7 goals, and lastly, having at least 100,000 visitors of variation. Now, when you look at how likely people are to follow these behaviors, you see a couple of trends. The first is that the vast majority of people don't follow this advice. This advice is only followed 3 to 15% or 19% of the time. That means that 80 to 90% of all accounts, experiments, and variations don't meet any of these best practices. Now note, by the way, on lines of code, never set a target on having more code in experiments because that's how you get bad code. But do ask yourself if you're evolving your complexity. Now the reason why people don't actively have all these elements is that they're perpetually forced between 3 competing goals. Do they have the resources, the traffic, or the time? But each of these can be effective in some form. You can increase your flexibility by hiring employees, asking internally, or contracting externals. You can increase your traffic by acquiring more traffic or focusing on retention. And you can improve the time that you have for a test by making drastic changes that can be detected faster, choosing high baseline goals, or waiting longer. And when you do these, you start to see that there is a light at the end of that tunnel. And that light is what true best practice looks like. Now, before I show you this, I'll start with the average experiment run on Optimizely today. In 2016, we looked at 100,000 experiments with over 1,000 visitors per variation. what we found was that out of these, 26% of all tests run around the world had a statistically significant uplift. This is the average experiment run around the world today. Now, when you compare this to a best practice experiment, those filter down for 100,000 visitors and 50 lines of code, having at least 7 goals or 4 variations. Just try and guess for a moment how many experiments meet these criteria. I know most of you won't shout it out, but do you have a number in your head? A guess of what this might be? Sorry? 1. It's a little bit more than that. Any other guesses? Sorry? 18. You guys have a very pessimistic view of the world. This shows that you know what you're talking about. It's 183 experiments out of 103,000. 1 in 550 experiments run around the world in 2016 meet these criteria. But their likelihood of having a winning experiment is more than 3 times higher than the average, 77%. This is what true best practice looks like. Now, what I want to say to you is not every experiment needs this amount of effort, needs this amount of research and resources put into it. But every now and then you find a problem that is worth solving for your business, a plateau that you need to break through. And the question you have to ask yourself is, did you test what was comfortable, or did you truly give it your best effort? Thank you.